What's the scariest theory known to man? The dual consciousness theory disturbed me when I read about it. Basically, in my limited layman understanding, a corpus callosotomy is a procedure that is sometimes used to treat conditions like epilepsy where the connection between the two halves of the brain is severed. People can survive this and continue to live semi-normally, but usually with some cognitive impairments. Both halves of the brain continue to be alive, but there is little to no communication between the two sides. People who undergo the procedure can also exhibit some strange phenomena like alien hand syndrome, where the patient feels like some of their limbs will move on their own accord. They can also have difficulty controlling their non-dominant hand, trouble speaking, and issues with certain parts of their vision. The dual consciousness theory posits that both halves of the brain retain a consciousness after this procedure. Essentially, you become two people sharing the same body, completely unaware of each other. One variation of the theory is that one half of the brain is dominant, controlling most bodily functions, while the other half is basically cut off from most external stimuli, unable to communicate with the outside world for the rest of their life. The dark forest theory, that there are lots of other advanced civilizations out there in space, but they are concealing their presence because they know how suicidally dangerous it is to be broadcasting your planet's location out to the universe. That at any moment at any given time some unknown cosmic thing could come from outer space and wipe us out in a blink, vacuum decay or gamma ray burst. Even our sun could just produce a huge enough solar storm and we are basically doomed. Cold death of the universe, that the speed at which the universe is expanding is to the point where gravity will never pull it back, matter will spread out and cool down and decay until everything, everywhere, just stops forever. The theory of proton decay, where every single bit of baryonic matter will eventually just spontaneously dissolve into radiation and fundamental particles, guaranteeing that there will be no survivors at the end of the universes. Yeah, terrible. Not really a theory, but being the oldest person alive, there's just something so chilling about the fact that literally every human that existed at the time of her birth is now dead except for her. She's the last of the human race in her snapshot of time. That a more stable form of vacuum exists, and if it did, we would collapse into it. It could be headed towards us now, and we literally would never know it's coming. If you get blasted with a ton of radiation, your body instantly dies, but you will keep living for a while, potentially weeks, like the Japanese nuclear plant worker who took more radiation than anyone else in history. Your DNA will shatter throughout your body, meaning as cells die, they will never be replaced again. Your body essentially starts rotting while you're still using it. The idea that the uncanny valley is because of the ancient hominins we used to interact with during the Pleistocene. Sure, there were interbreeding events, but imagine if you had no idea what a Neanderthal or a Denisovan were and saw one for the first time. You and your family have been traveling far from home and seek refuge in a cave for the night. You get a fire going. Everyone starts to relax. Then out of nowhere, this almost human looking being walks up. You all panic and run. Reacting with fear was probably the easiest way to make it out of an encounter like that alive. What if our understandings of physics and science, what we base our whole lives around, is just wrong? A man born without eyes cannot see. What if we are missing a huge chunk of reality, simply due to an inability to detect it? That we may live the same life over and over without knowing. Just the concept of infinity and eternity, regardless of who's correct about what happens when you die, it's terrifying. Either the lights go out for good and your consciousness is lost forever, or the afterlife is a never-ending Groundhog's Day scenario. Gives me anxiety sometimes if I think too deep about it. I had a breakdown in Sunday school some 20 odd years ago about it, and the deacon told me that heaven was so amazing and perfect that eternity was a blessing. I didn't buy it. Having it all end is immensely frightening. Having it never end seems worse. Aliens theory by Neil deGrasse Tyson. Let's say intelligence is your ability to compose poetry, symphonies, do art, math and science. Chimps can't do any of that, yet we share 99% DNA. Everything that we are, that distinguishes us from chimps, emerges from that 1% difference. Imagine a life form whose brain power is to ours as ours is to a chimpanzee's. To such a species, our highest mental achievements would be trivial. Their toddlers, instead of learning their ABCs on Sesame Street, would learn multivariable calculus on Boolean Boulevard. Our most complex theorems, our deepest philosophies, the cherished works of our most creative artists, would be projects their school kids bring home for mom and dad to display on the refrigerator door. Scary. To me, nothing is scarier than death. The notion that I won't exist, and that everyone that is alive around me will be gone. I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to this thought, and it is suffocating. I would rather return to a nightmare than awaken to the contemplation of death. Not a theory in the common usage of the term, just a scary fact. The rest of the universe is expanding at such a rate that I'm guessing the timescale can't actually recall the real number. A few billions of years all the galaxies we can see now will be so far away that their light would never again reach Earth. So if you look out through a telescope after that time, there would be no indication of a universe larger than a handful of galaxies in what is known as the local group. It would be impossible to ever know there was more beyond those. And just to add caution, sure, it will be asked, the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light, hence the light ceases to be able to reach us. Yes, space can expand faster than light. It's not limited by the speed of light, because it's space itself that's expanding, not something that's traveling through space, which would be limited to the speed of light. Once we develop virtual reality that is indistinguishable from our own, which it seems we are on way to achieving, the question becomes, how do we know that it didn't happen already? The single electron theory. A positron is identical to an electron moving backwards through time, and since all electrons and all positrons have identical, to the best of our current knowledge, properties, it's possible that all the electrons and all the positrons in the universe is just one particle moving forwards and backwards through time. This means that the future is already decided, and there is no free will. Pascal's wager for the whole God thing is pretty interesting. He argued that people can choose to believe in God, or can choose to not believe in God, and that God either exists, or he does not. Under these conditions, if a person believes in the Christian God and this God actually exists, they gain infinite happiness. If a person does not believe in the Christian God and God exists, they receive infinite suffering. On the other hand, if a person believes in the Christian God and God does not exist, then they receive some finite disadvantages from a life of Christian living. And if a person does not believe in this God and God does not exist, then they receive some finite pleasure from a life lived unhindered by Christian morality. As Pascal states, let us weigh the gain and the loss in wagering that God is. Let us estimate these two chances. If you gain all. If you lose nothing. Wager. Then, without hesitation, that is, I'm rolling the dice myself, but I can see someone not wanting to risk it. That I'd still be awake after death, but with everything, well, shut down. Imagine not being able to see, hear, speak, feel, and remembering and thinking normally, screaming into the darkness for all eternity, with no one listening. I would like to think the Boltzmann brain theory is pretty scary, essentially that due to the randomness of particles floating in space, if you had infinity to monitor them, somewhere out there would be anything you could ever imagine. A dragon, a robot, a planet, even your own brain. Statistically, you're more likely to be a brain floating somewhere out in space due to the random flow of particles, and that brain has created everything you know as life. That is more likely than the fact our planet has gone through so much, and led our evolution, to produce Homo sapiens over millions of years. It's been refuted, but I love to think about things like that. It's been refuted by several people and other theories have been crafted off of it. It's interesting to think about. Quantum immortality, if correct, it guarantees that you will never die. It guarantees nothing else. I suppose there was a sweet oblivion, like deep sleep, at first, but in retrospect, I think it was no more than a day. Slowly, but unmistakably, I reoccupied my corpse with dreamlike consciousness, numb for the first merciful hours, blind, deaf, and immobile. But then I seemed to reconnect to every nerve and became aware of every sensation more so than I ever was in life. I perceived myself trapped within an immovable object, and the intensity of the struggle amplified, subtle, then acute, then racking. I cannot describe it completely, but imagine holding your breath, beyond urge, beyond pain, beyond desperate, your head throbbing, and eyes bulging, a dream of suffocation without end. My skin blistered and split in the sunlight. Biting insects descended rapidly. I felt eggs hatch, larvae crawl, gases build and burst within me, individual cells rupturing, interstitial fluids souring and blackening. Somehow my capacity to experience and store these sensations grew even as I was keenly aware of my cerebrum being scattered and devoured. My perception expanded into the gizzards of birds and the depths of fire ant dens. I was aware of every fingernail and strand of hair that pulled away in the wind, and my sensation clung to them as they settled in the ocean and dissolved in the maws of a trillion diatoms. I don't understand it. The more bits of me there were, the larger my capacity for the perception of pain. As I decayed into pieces smaller than living nerves could possibly distinguish, the character of the discomfort changed from burning and aching and breaking I might relate to you in human terms to something worse that I cannot fully articulate. A terrible, maddening stretching of every part of myself from every other part. Humans often numb to chronic pains in life, do they not? Yet every year, every month, every second that passed, I swear it only intensified over time. In my previous life, I ruminated on heaven and hell, and the likelihood of my experiencing one, the other, or something in between. As terrible as I imagined the torpor of heaven or the torments of hell to be, this was entirely different from either. In hell, at least, there would surely be a tormentor, some memory of my deeds, some sense of justice. Even if my soul rejected its logic, I can imagine some comfort in hell. For a mind such as mine, I do not think this is a punishment. I do not think it is caused. I deeply suspect it is simply our condition, our nature to go on this way. Do you see? In all that time, I was certainly, absolutely, totally alone. And before long all memory of life had shriveled to a cinder, lost beneath my interminable anguish. Alive again. I suspect I cannot quite recall the worst of it, as if my living brain is too small for the experience.